Why are so many people overwhelmed with clutter? Disorganization is causing shame, suffering, friendships, time, money. People just like you, wondering where and how to create an organized lifestyle. This podcast offers expert tips and solutions for your clutter obstacles. My name is Rachel Seavey, and this is the Organized Podcast. Hey, collectors, welcome to the Organized Podcast. I'm your host, professional organizer, Rachel Seavey. And today I have Elizabeth Nelson on the podcast. Now, Elizabeth is the co-founder, and speaker for Children of Hoarders. They are a grassroots, all-volunteer, not-for-profit organization run by adult children of hoarders for children of hoarders. They're dedicated to increasing awareness and understanding the unique challenges facing children of hoarders while helping them to support themselves and each other. I have the pleasure, if you are watching this on YouTube, to have interviewed Elizabeth Nelson. She has been on lots of different television shows, and there's a lot of information about her here on the website. If you are listening, please go to childrenofhoarders.com. As a side note, before I start the interview, I just want to say I really learned a lot during this interview, and I don't usually say that I have been misinformed, or maybe I've said some things. So this definitely provoked a lot of thought in my just communication with you all, especially communication with people that are children that have grown up in hoarding households, which is actually a population that I work with quite often. So it was real to just listen to her emotion and her passion about the subject. And I hope you enjoy it. I hope you're not offended if you struggle with hoarding. This isn't meant to attack you, but hopefully it's meant to open up your mind and see what you've put your children through and see maybe what they feel like, because that communication might have been silenced a long time ago, or there might be some dynamics in the relationship where that hasn't been able to be listened to or heard. So I invite anyone that's affected by hoarding at all to listen to this episode. Without further ado, here is Elizabeth. Hey, collectors. Today I have Elizabeth Nelson from Children of Hoarders. Thank you so much for being here, Elizabeth. I'm very happy to have you here, and I'd just love to hear more about your organization.
Sure. This has been a topic that was very hard for a lot of people my age to wrestle with. So I'm 47, and I think most people have noticed that compulsive hoarding has only been high profile in the last 10 years, maybe. So for those of us who grew up in homes that looked so very different, and as adults were watching our parents age in places that were unsafe, our organization started out as just a place online for people to connect. The starting point of our organization, it took me a while to understand that what was wrong with in my family, what my mother was struggling with, had a name. And once I had a name, finding resources was very difficult. And what I was able to find 15 years ago was just groups that were broadly framed as sort of friends of hoarders, or anybody who had any kind of connection at all to hoarding. This included people who were married, like had a spouse who was struggling, a daughter, any relationship. And what our organization is really about is understanding that the relationship of being a child, either growing up with this or watching a parent suffer with it later in life, is a unique perspective. And I think particularly for those of us who grew up with a parent who suffered from this illness, there are a lot of things that are hard to share. They're not easily understood by people who don't share the experience. And so Our organization started at a time when there was very little information about compulsive hoarding. We very quickly came to realize that the research was minimal. The research didn't appear to be describing a lot of the experiences that we knew to be true. And there was a need for our voices to be heard. Particularly when research and experts sometimes say things that run counter to our experience. And I will say that at the start of our organization, I would say that all of us, the first 50 people who began participating in our online group, we came to it with the same sort of anxiety about maybe my family is uniquely weird and I'm experiencing something that is different from everybody else. And as our group grew bigger and bigger, we started to identify patterns and find that there was just a lot of common experience. And that was very reassuring. I have come to believe that there are quite a lot of characteristics of this illness that family observed before researchers, and probably family is still observing, and researchers have to catch up on understanding what we're seeing.
What do you feel like researchers get incorrect the most from your perspective?
I think that a lot of people who are struggling with this, researchers acknowledge that perfectionism is very real. A lot of people who are compulsively hoard are real type A personalities. And so I think the desire to conceal the behavior, the desire to minimize the behavior, the impulse to blame it on other people, that has to be put in a very special context. And so I think the thing that is missing quite a lot from outside observers who are stepping in and trying to address the situation, if you take it at face value, how a compulsive hoarder is describing their environment, describing their circumstances, describing even the people around them, the family members who are trying to help them, you may get what sounds like a very sensible and reasonable and level-headed explanation. And what is driving that is a lot of basically concealment, I guess.
Manipulation or is it shame?
Yes, I think it is manipulation.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the things that I say about my mother, because I think when you use the word manipulation, it sounds like you are projecting a lot of bad motives onto somebody else. And I have a certain amount of distance from my mother now. A lot of therapy helps you let go of a lot of anger, right? The way I make sense of my mother, and I know that she is not atypical. She accomplished a lot of big things in her life, and she was in the habit of achieving the things that she set out to do. And she is a perfectionist. And I think that looking around her physical environment and trying to make sense of it, she could not make sense of it and take responsibility for it. And I know that was extreme for her to own it, for her to accept how much her own behavior had created the situation. It was too much. It was too hard. I think that she really, that this is a fundamental challenge. If you take somebody who is a lot of their behavior is driven by perfectionism and not wanting to make a mistake, it's going to be very, very hard for them to own up and take responsibility for the negative impact that their behavior has on other people.
Yeah, no, I definitely have observed that in the field where, and when I say manipulation, it's probably a word that I've picked up from somebody in your situation being frustrated, but it feels like it when, I go in the home and I see what it looks like. And, the family members know what it looks like, but out in the world, this person can be incredibly articulate, accomplished. And it's almost like the shame, I don't know if it's shame in the perfectionism, whatever it is making it so that they, minimize, as you've said. And I don't know that people are aware that they're doing it or if they are, but I do think that there's definite, hiding of what's really going on in the home. And that must be hard for family members that have grown up in it. And I work with a lot of family members, and I'd say most of them are at the fed up point
Hmm.
with their family member, usually their parent, and they've come to me like, I don't care what you do, she has to move into senior living, with that sort of an attitude. So with
Well,
you,
and I think another piece of it that is broadly misunderstood is when you are interacting with a family member who is at that point of being fed up. Um, there is a lot that is behind those words of like, I don't care how it happens, it's just got to be fixed, and there's no way of explaining the many hours. It would be impossible for anyone coming from the outside to understand what happened before it got to that point. And so that's what's really challenging also, is I think what I see is that children of hoarders and family members are often accused of not being understanding enough, or being too direct, or too, like you're not patient enough, or you haven't, you're being guided by your emotions. And the truth is that somebody who has grown up with this, somebody who has been sort of an insider when few people knew the secret, there's a lot that we have been asked to swallow. And so it's kind of like the pop bottle that has been just shaken and shaken and shaken. And we didn't shake it ourselves. Like it happened to us. I mean, there's a limit to how much patience you can have when you have tried absolutely everything. And fundamentally, like there are messages that we get from for just sort of socially, ideas around the responsibility we should have for this family member. Like if you cared for them, they wouldn't be living this way. And to the extent that any expert or advisor is reinforcing that message of, well, you're just doing it wrong, or you haven't gone about it the right way, or you just don't care enough, that is extremely upsetting. And frankly, it's just sort of an added layer to the kind of gaslighting that we grew up with. I mean, I grew up being told constantly that the house looks the way it did because I didn't help my mother enough. So for an expert to tell me as a 47-year-old that I'm not helping my mother enough, like, no, I'm done with that message. That's over. Yeah, I mean, I was told all my growing up that, the house looked the way it did because I didn't put my shoes away.
right.
This has been a real constant refrain, and for me personally, and I know for a lot of people in my situation, a lot of what we are trying to find is that space of truth. And that space of truth is that this problem is due to an illness. First of all, it's an illness that I am not suffering from. It's something that my loved one is suffering from. And I think the other piece of it for me is that, I am not a trained therapist. And even if I were, I would not be in the best position to be dealing with my mother and helping her solve this problem. Yeah. It's not good for me. It's not good for me to be part of that equation.
Right.
It just isn't.
And people really need to let that go. And I hear that, friends or neighbors will say, well, gosh, where are her children? Why are you here? And I think people need to let that idea go that, just because you have an aging parent or parent in general, that you have to take care of them. I mean, if you've got trauma and you've got decades worth of, therapy bills and stuff working with your mom, I haven't talked to my mom in decades. I mean, I see where people can say, I don't want to deal with this either. Is that an option? Or, I mean, what's the best way when you don't want to deal with the situation? Do you just step back and say, this is your illness, this is your issue, and good luck with it? Or what's your...
Well, I mean, I think it's important that, first of all, we understand the impact that it had on us. I will say that for many years, I didn't see myself as someone who had experienced any kind of trauma at all. My own family was upper middle class. I had all of the advantages that could be bought. I had lots of opportunities, and I went to school and did well. But there is something big about hiding where you live, being ashamed of where you live, being told in a lot of different ways that either it's your fault the way you live, or even if it's not articulated, there's a message for children growing up when they see other people's homes and they see how different it is. My sister tells me that she grew up believing that she just didn't deserve a home that was nice. It was clearly not a priority for our mother. And what kind of message is that? At any rate, I think we all need to take a step back and look at the significance of growing up in a physical space that is embarrassing, that you may be blamed for, that is not, it's not a healthy place to be. That alone is like a pretty big deal. And I'm concerned when that reality is minimized. So I think that for everybody, the decision about how involved you can be or want to be is going to be a personal one. There was my family dynamics were complicated by other things related to my father's poor health in the last years of his life. He was suffering in a really terrible way, and my mother was fighting help that would have made it safer for him. And so I think it was easier for me to step away. It's just realizing that like she had done a lot of damage and it was not healthy for my children to be around her. Other people have drawn lines in different places, but I think many people who have not separated themselves or have not drawn lines, I think many people who grew up like I did have not really come to terms with what the kind of baggage they're carrying around from the experience.
Yeah.
Like I said, it took me years to realize that there was something internalized in me, knowing that I had grown up in a space that I was ashamed and embarrassed about, and I had taken that on as some of my identity, feeling like I had to fake and pretend to be normal because deep down I felt very abnormal because of the house that I lived in. And the other piece of it is realizing that my childhood wasn't great just because I turned out okay. I just think that my responsibility for my mother is not what society tells me it is. My responsibility for my mother is maybe what I'm capable of, and I'm not capable of treating somebody with mental illness. And people who don't understand that, people who might like hear me say that I'm estranged from my mother and think less of me, well, they simply don't understand, and I have to just accept that there are people who are not going to understand.
I grew up in a traumatic type of a household as well. And I get the same thing when people don't understand why, well, when did you talk to your mother last? And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, that's a long story. But no one understands because, they weren't there. And, being embarrassed of where you live, being embarrassed of having a mentally ill parent, that's a lot to grow up with. And I know that I can relate, not how you did, but in a very close way, of just not feeling like I really was worth living in a nice home. And when you said that, it really hit home because just your story, I'm sure anyone growing up in any sort of abusive household, I mean, at some point, and I just love it. And I love that you said your kids don't need to be subjected to that. I made the same decision. I said, I don't want my son to be exposed to that unstable, heartache, traumatic, creating person. So, I mean, it was just something, and people don't understand it. Well, that's his grandmother, et cetera. And it's like, well, that's okay. That's exactly what society is telling you to say, but that would ruin my child's life, to have that person in his life. So,
well, I think in the early days of our organization, we were trying to find parallels with other experiences. And we talked a little bit about families of alcoholics and what kind of parallels might exist there. And one of the things that I thought about was, there is a fundamental difference with hoarding, particularly with highly functional people who are hoarding. my mother was never going to accidentally start hoarding in the middle of the street. Every piece of her disorder could be successfully hidden. And so she could present herself well in every situation. And it was fairly straightforward to avoid having anyone see the house. And so unlike something like alcoholism or other kinds of dysfunction where somebody slips up and there's a reveal, a lot of people are like me, and there was never a reveal. And so for all of our lives, our families presented as highly functional and everything wonderful. And we were basically part of a performance. It makes you feel fake. It makes you feel less than genuine. It makes you, these are not good feelings. I mean, now that I am a parent, I realize more clearly how much I want my own children to feel good about themselves and confident about where they come from and not ashamed of it. Because where you come from is a big piece of who you are.
Yeah, I agree. And I've had the pleasure of spending some time with children of parents that are hoarding. And I remember one time I went in and I really helped this guy's mother, and I didn't really get to know him very well, just over the phone. He was out of state. And even the people in the senior home said, well, if her son was here more often, it wouldn't be like that. And he was this like grown man with his own life, a busy professional. And so I went in, everything was great. And then maybe a month later, I came back in and she had destroyed the place, all of the progress I had made, and was incredibly hurtful and just nasty. And I called him up, and it was, I'll never forget it. He said, that's what I've experienced my whole life, this rejection, this trying hard to please someone and never being good enough for them. And I was like, no wonder you're all the way where you are and not, live your life. And I just got it. And I was like, just touched that he would share something like that with me, because a lot of people don't. So I'm, what advice would you give me as a professional? I tend to be totally outside of the box and dance to my own beat. I mean, I read the books that are out there and stuff, but I'm more in the field and with people in a daily basis versus writing a book and, stuff like that. I don't know. I feel like I'm in the trenches constantly. What would be the best thing for me to do with a family member?
Well, first of all, I would elevate their perception of the situation and reassure them and validate what they see. They have probably been watching their compulsive hoarder in their life spin all kinds of fantastical explanations and excuses for the behavior. And they are probably family members are probably used to not being taken seriously or not being heard ever. One of the things that was special about our organization was it was the first time for many, many people to share. I have an example, like from the beginning of when I first started trying to find support for this, one of the things I bumped up against in one of these broader support groups where it was, spouses and children and sisters and brothers and just any kind of relationship, trying to share my experience of how challenging it was to deal with a parent who lived, 3 hours away, but was like sending me boxes and boxes of stuff. And, like the things that happen when you live a little bit of a distance away, but you're maintaining a relationship, and regular visits and what like unpleasantness of that. I got some pushback from somebody who was married and living with somebody who compulsively hoarded. And the perspective was basically like, you're not even living with it. Why you don't even like, why would you let this bother you? You don't have to live with it. And I mean, it's so much bigger than that. It is so much bigger than the space, whether you are in proximity to it in the moment. there's just it's a lot. And, my perspective, of course, for somebody who is married to someone and choosing to live with them is, well, I didn't get to choose this. I mean, so much about my childhood was warped in this very weird way. And then I come to terms with understanding how fundamentally ill my mother is. And I'm dealing with the universal challenge of an aging parent. And I have this layered on top. It's harder to step away from responsibility that is the parent-child than I think it would be to step away and divorce in a spousal situation. I guess, we could look at it in any number of different directions. Everybody maybe thinks the grass is greener on the other side, but it's just different. It's very, very different.
It is. And and I feel like the grandkids, I mean, even another generation gets involved or not involved. I've got people that say, well, I don't want my kids going to my mom's house until it's cleaned up. It's not safe. Or, why don't my grandkids ever come see me? Is it really that bad here? But there is even another generation that is being brought in that I see, or I've even started talking to grandkids, especially if they find me on Instagram or something, and they're worried about their grandparents' safety. And the best advice, I would love to give them your website. It seems like you've got articles and, all sorts of information on there.
Yeah, I had a funny conversation with a specialist. This has been years ago now. It probably was 10 years ago, because I live in a town with a research university. And so there were just a lot of people sort of on my back doorstep. And I talked to this doctor about hoarding. He treats hoarders. And I said, I'm part of this organization, and we're supporting each other, but we're also finding common threads and patterns to the behavior that we don't feel or heard or noticed very much. And our conversation was pretty stiff for about 5 minutes. And then he finally kind of broke down and said, all right, I got to tell you, when I first heard your organization, all I could think was, well, that's going to be a bunch of angry people. And I said, well, when I reached out to you to make this appointment, did you look at the website? And he hadn't. And while we were sitting together, he looked at the website and he said, oh, this is okay. Yeah, this is good. I think from 10 years ago to now, it's probably a little more frustrating for us that we're seeing some of the same messaging that we were saying 10 years ago was problematic. Trying to, when advice so often and almost consistently includes recommendations about family members being helpers, that's very, very challenging.
Without getting too, I don't want to get too into that. I haven't seen that. like I said, I kind of am aware of the community, but I'm just so like independent and in my own life that I'm not just, I don't want to be like an expert and talk and write books and things like that. Like, I just enjoy helping people. So is this like on the TV shows that you're seeing these messages, or is it like books or conferences or?
So there's a member of our organization who is really tracking this stuff, and she sends me clips from research articles and studies that are kind of highlighting the dynamic of hoarders and family members, and kind of finding fault with how family members are challenged by the situation. And I think it's just a little bit backwards, frankly, because while it might seem easy to identify the hoarding as the center of the universe and everything else is just part of the solar system revolving around it, I think what we're begging and pleading with people to understand is that we as family members are in an orbit that we actually shouldn't be a part of. Maybe there are situations where we could be a part of it, but I am very much in favor of a closer analysis of, what kind of damage is happening to us when we're in this solar system. What kind of conversation should be happening to get us out of that solar system? I went to a function at the university in my town, and Dr. Frost, one of the eminent experts, was giving a presentation there, and he was talking about his experiences. I don't think he expected me to be there. He thought he was in a room full of just graduate students, but I got invited. And he said something really offensive to me, offensive to me, and like probably no one else in the audience if they didn't share my experience. He said, family members are the worst. They're the worst. They're terrible. Like he meant in the context of trying to get a hoarder in treatment or working with a hoarder, that we were we were the worst. Like we were not a positive influence on the situation when he is trying to intervene. Like we were basically an obstacle. And I raised my hand and I spoke up and I said, I think I urge you to think about what your words sound like to anybody who is the only person who knows about the situation, the only person who's helping their parent, like maybe even get food to eat because they don't have a functional refrigerator. Like there are so many situations where there is no therapist on hand. There is no one. There is no outsider who has been brought into the equation to be that wonderful helper like Dr. Frost has been able to be for whoever, how many. It is for family members to hear that they are an obstacle to help is just very unhelpful and just really problematic. I mean, we are on the front lines and doing the best we can, and also victims in the situation. There are situations that are a lot worse than what I grew up with and what my family dealt with. It's sort of a spectrum, but it was I spoke up about this issue starting years ago because I realized that a lot of us are carrying shame around like associating this problem with families or people that are just dysfunctional in a more extreme way. And so I was really excited to have opportunities to speak out and say, look, both my parents have graduate degrees from Ivy League institutions. I have 3 siblings. All of us have done well in life. We grew up taking violin lessons and cello lessons and doing all of the things that you expect of functional upper middle class families. And we had this deep, dark secret. And when my family understood that it was a mental illness, we were all on the same page. We were all going to come together. We didn't lack the resources to find all the right solutions for my mother. And we struggled. If a family like mine can struggle, I'm not comfortable with anybody pointing the finger and saying that family members are obstacles, because I know what my family went through. And if you layered on even a handful of extra disadvantages to the mix, I don't know how any family could address the situation that my family was dealing with. We had every resource. I was going to the library and pulling all the articles. I was reaching out to experts. I was doing, we tried everything. And I think that a lot of folks don't understand just how challenging this is.
I would agree. And, I usually don't recommend that family members work, but I don't know that I've ever thought of them as an obstacle. But maybe, that's something I should look at when I'm just speaking, because I just think working with anyone, on anything in general can be complicated, and it's nice to have an outside source. And of course, that's my business. But it's not because family members are necessarily an obstacle. I just have always felt like they have their own lives, and that it's not really your job to clean up your mom's house. Maybe but a lot of the times the daughter will find me. Mostly it's the daughter. I don't know why. Sometimes it's the son. And I've never thought of them as an obstacle. I've thought of them doing everything that they could do. I mean, they've even found me, and but at some point, I mean, you can't be expected to do the actual cleanup. Is that what people are saying? Or the support? Or
I think the emotional support is the obstacle part of it. That our emotion around it is unhelpful. That we are basically discouraging more progress because of the negativity we bring to the equation. And I think this goes to a piece of what is also a mixed bag about this being a more public topic. So in the beginning, before there were TV shows, there was all this shame around like what kind of a family is living this way, not the kind of family I want to be a part of. And then I think the Hoarders show highlighted some things to help people recognize that this is happening to all kinds of families. It's turned into, I think, a bit of a joke that people talk about hoarding as if it is a lighthearted little quirk that they struggle with, not understanding that compulsive hoarding, the mental illness, has so much other dysfunction wrapped up in it. I find myself in conversations that I didn't have 10 years ago, where I mentioned that my mother is a hoarder, and maybe they don't understand what that actually means. Maybe they think I'm describing just a few too many National Geographics or like a chicken collection on the shelf or something. Maybe they don't totally understand. Like 10 years ago, maybe I said hoarding and I could articulate that this is a mental illness where it's the physical space of her house is unsafe, and she is resistant to help and changing it.
Yeah. So on the television shows, I have seen, and even in real life, I have seen family members that can get very defensive or just upset or just express how they feel. And I've never really even seen that as an obstacle. Maybe they have to be there because they have a childhood room in the home still, and the home's going on the market. And
well, I mean, I guess the other piece of it is when it's suggested that maybe we're not an obstacle, but like we're just not interacting with the situation in the right way. Yeah. That this is it. I have definitely read books with suggestions for family members on how to be supportive. And that's very hard to read. That's hard to read because, again, the hoarder has spent invested quite a lot of time in telling insiders, anybody who's interacting with the space, exactly the rules for engagement. And it's not a fair it's not an even exchange the way how healthy relationship would be, where people are drawing boundaries and setting their expectations, and you expect people to respect you and they expect you to respect, it is not like that. It is very imbalanced. If anybody who has lived with a hoarder or interacted in a serious way with the hoarder in the hoarded environment, that it's not anything in the realm of reasonable. Like, we have spent anyone who has had this close relationship knows that they have spent many years being told how they are, what the terms are for interaction, what the terms are for engaging with the space. And to have experts give us another set of rules, and the dynamics are putting the hoarder at the center. It's like, we've done that. We've been there. It's time for us to step back and understand comprehensively all of the dynamics in this scenario. And it can't always be the hoarder at the center. It just can't.
No, it can't. And so when people call me or grandkids or children, you're suggesting that I elevate their perception of the situation and just validate what they've experienced.
When I talk to people who are describing a scenario where they are overwhelmed and they feel like they are the only touch point for that person, like nobody else knows but me, or I am sprinkling them with questions about anyone who can be brought in, anyone outside the situation to be brought in. And I reassure them that, what they are wrestling with is not a reasonable problem for them to take on. And I do a lot of
I agree.
listening, frankly. Because I know the dynamic, I'm able to sort of ask leading questions like, when you did that, she was really mad, right? Or, and I assume she didn't. No, of course she wouldn't, I mean,
Yes.
I know how these things go, because anybody who has been dealing with this with any length of time has a long list of strategies that they have attempted, compromises they've tried to make, solutions they have
Negotiations.
tried, things that sound crazy, but they were the only thing that was acceptable to the hoarder. Like, I
Yep.
built an addition on the house
Yep.
because that was we got a storage unit because we just need, and it's just unstoppable. It's like a boat with a hole in it, and you can't ever fill the hole, and you just keep getting bigger buckets trying to bail it out. And it's so hard.
Yes. And I like that you said that people just use the word hoarding so lightly, because I do deal with compulsive hoarders where there are rules and boundaries, and I've worked with them for years. And I know that if even, breaking down a box in the wrong way might just set them off, or I know to just leave my garbage bag open because they're going to go through it, even though they've been hovering the entire time. But I couldn't imagine thinking a family member or just somebody that's not, this is a job. I mean, I have a full-time job doing this with people, and that seems a little bit more appropriate. Or maybe there's people that do it for free than somebody that's had to deal with this person their whole life.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think the other piece of it is that when an expert is saying, these are the parameters you're going to work through, these are the guidelines that are necessary to alleviate the anxiety. I think from the perspective of a family member, there might be a little bit of like, oh, sure, you think that's the parameters. Like, you have no idea.
Right.
I have had to suck up so much completely irrational and unreasonable standards for how to function in the house. Like, that's no.
I found, and I know when I was first reading a lot of those books, and I mean, I can't even remember which one, um, that a lot of the times, the people writing the books or teaching the classes hadn't actually been in a hoarding situation. And I get that. I get people with hoarding certificates and all these things that apply to work for me, but they've never actually been in a hoarded house before or seen the dynamics or even been on anything. But they're like experts. And I'm like, how are you an expert and you've never even like seen a hoard? So that's always fascinated me. I think a lot of people are speculating, or maybe, trying to sell a book. I don't know what it is, but
Well, I know that I remember I once gave a presentation. This was fairly recently because people knew about the TV shows, and I was talking about how my family struggled, and I was speaking about events that had happened a few years earlier. And at the end of the talk, somebody raised their hand and they said, "Well, so that's what happened to your family, but now it's different because like you can call a hotline, right?" I mean, they really thought from seeing the TV shows that there are these teams of people that are available to come in and help. And I know a handful of people who have participated on these TV shows, and I know from just like knowing was involved in that. Like, so first of all, like the TV shows are identifying a subset of people who have really reached the end of their rope. They have like no other option. And so this is a family that is open to being exposed in that way. So already you've created a fairly small subset. And that it runs counter to a lot of the dynamics of hoarding. So a family that is like the person is willing to accept and receive help. I mean, they know going into those TV shows that a team of people is going to go in their house. So that is you've already narrowed it down pretty narrow, pretty small. And the family's on board. I think about my own family. If I had proposed that as a solution going on a TV show, all of my family members would have opposed the idea, in addition to my mother. I mean, every single person would have opposed that idea. My mother would not have been willing. My mother was locking the door and not letting like one person into the house when her house was actually presentable, and I had tried to arrange a system of somebody coming in to help her maintain it. Because this is the other thing, like, the person's percent. I have in the past compared hoarding to almost like body dysmorphia. They're not seeing the problem for what it is, and they're not recognizing the situation that they are in. My mother's house, it was made presentable, and then I wanted somebody to just sort of come in and help her pick up, because what she was professing to everyone who would listen was that she had no help, was that the problem with the house was that she had no help. And then you create the scenario where there is help, and we presented it to her as, this is this person. We have nothing to do with it. She's going to come in and you tell her what to do. You tell her what to do. She wouldn't accept that.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, there are just a lot of control issues that are not visible on the surface, because things that my mother said to us in the family, things that my mother refused, are not things that she would ever admit to anyone outside the house.
Definitely. And I work with a lot of affluent people, and that adds just another level of, I mean, most of my clients would never, ever go on any sort of show themselves, ever. I can't think of one client that would. So you're right, that's a pretty small demographic there, and they're in dire need of help on the shows, which a lot of my clients aren't. Some of them own multiple homes and hoard those out. And they don't realize what they're doing. It's very interesting, like you said, with the body dysmorphia or ambivalence, or I'm not sure what it is. But it's interesting to work in. But I come from a perspective where I just go home and I deal with my own family. Like, I don't bring all that baggage home. So I couldn't imagine a family member being, expected or to help. But and you're right. I mean, there are organizers here in the Bay Area, and it sounds like you live in like a college town, but there aren't that many resources, in general, of people that are going to come in and really help with the psychology and help with everything that needs to be done. I mean, all of it's really expensive too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
and I think you end up with a lot of people who have developed expertise without any academic credentials, because the businesses that for years have been clearing homes, just collecting junk, they've had a window into hoarding. And now the businesses that 15 years ago were just sort of junk clearing businesses, now all of a sudden, their businesses are describing that they deal with hoarding situations. There's a big difference between there's a huge difference, I would argue, between the person who has expertise based on the people who were willing to participate in a study, and the person who has expertise based on having to walk into a house because the city has said, we're going to like condemn it if you don't clear it. The people who are really trapped, and they have to like hire the guy with the truck. Sometimes the guy with the truck has some pretty serious insights into what this looks like.
Oh yeah, no, and I'm the girl with the truck. So we do that. I don't do so my actual, besides having a podcast, is I have a business, that organizes, but we do the same kind of thing where it's cleaning and hauling, and I see a lot. So I love your perspective a lot, because I think listeners would be I think listeners, need to hear it if they have hoarding problems going on themselves. Maybe they're a bit in denial on what their family members have gone through for a long time, and then any family members that are listening now would be able to go on to your website, which is childrenofhoarders.com. I'm going to pull it up here. Or yeah, childrenofhoarders.com. And it's got so much information here, Elizabeth. I mean, I feel like somebody could really just spend, a Sunday or something going through this and learning about themselves, and maybe finding a community of people that have kind of gone through the same sort of thing. Because it's nice to have a community. I've found when I'm going through something in particular, um, where you feel like other people are going through the same thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So is it a membership? Is it, I see here people can donate and that you're a 501c. But
Yeah,
do people join?
mostly it's a place for people to connect.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great. And people just find you on childrenofhoarders.com. Are there other areas or social media or anything on YouTube that you want to share?
we are active on Facebook.
Okay.
I mean, really, there's so much information out there now. Like our world is so much more connected than it was at the beginning of our organization. I know that when there does appear to be sort of like a big new study that's out or a big new article that's been written about family dynamics, it's an opportunity for people like me to poke our nose in and express an opinion and say, maybe that's not my experience. I mean, we're really just trying to elevate our own experience and say, hey, like, you might not have seen this because my mom's not ever going to be in a study. That my experience of this wasn't the focus of your study of my parent, but this is what it looks like from where I sit. And we just want everybody to, I often say that the best decisions are made when all stakeholders are heard. And I think that applies to a lot.
Well, definitely keep this conversation close at heart when I'm working with family members, especially children of hoarders. I really value your time and appreciate you visiting here. And is there anything else you want to share? I'll be listing your website and all your contact information for the Children of Hoarders on this episode. It'll be on YouTube and downloaded on audio. So I'll send you all those links.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you inviting me to this conversation. I think there needs to be more conversations like this one.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to the Hoardganize podcast. Please make sure you're subscribed and join our Hoardganize podcast Facebook page and get additional tips and challenges.